I'm going to start with the second floor encounter, as I've pasted it together here from Marion Baker's Warren Commission testimony. As I came out to the second floor there, Mr. Truly was ahead of me, and as I come out, I was kind of scanning, the rooms, and I caught a glimpse of this man walking away. I happened to see him through this window in this door. I hollered at him at that time and said, "Come here." He turned and walked right straight back to me. I didn't get anything out of him. Mr. Truly had come up to my side here, and I turned to Mr. Truly and I says, "Do you know this man? Does he work here?" And he says, "Yes." And I turned immediately and went on out up the stairs. And according to Truly, this was Lee Harvey Oswald, and Baker confirmed that identification later after Oswald had been arrested. Now, there are some people who do not believe that second floor encounter ever happened. They think Truly was lying. They must think Baker was lying. They say lots of things. Well, one of the things they use is this account from Harry Holmes of the Oswald interview that he sat in on, where Holmes describes Oswald describing the encounter he had with a police officer. And Holmes says, when asked as to his whereabouts at the time of the shooting, he stated that when lunchtime came, he didn't say which floor he was on. He said one of the Negro employees invited him to eat lunch with him, and he stated, "You go on down and send the elevator back up, and I will join you in a few minutes." Before he could finish whatever he was doing, he stated, the commotion surrounding the assassination took place, and when he went downstairs, a policeman questioned him as to his identification, and his boss stated, "He is one of our employees," whereupon the policeman had him step aside momentarily. Following this, he simply walked out the front door of the building. I don't recall that anyone asked why he left or where or how he went. I just presumed that this had been covered in an earlier questioning. Now, we don't have transcripts of Oswald's questioning. We don't have recordings. We just have accounts like this by FBI agents, by Captain Fritz, and by Harry Holmes here, and a couple of other people. If you read this, you could think, well, this could describe the second floor encounter as I read it from Marion Baker. But there is a subtle difference here. According to Holmes, Oswald said that the policeman had him step aside momentarily after his boss had identified him as an employee, whereas Marion Baker says that after Truly identified him as an employee, he turned immediately and went on up the stairs. Now, this could simply be a variation, as will occur when people tell stories. But if you take each account literally, they're not describing the same thing. One says that the police officer took him aside momentarily after being identified as an employee, and the other says that after being identified as an employee, it was over. This account, as relayed by Harry Holmes, seems to fit better another incident that could have occurred. That is, I'll read that from here. This is from the Batchelor Report, talking about when Chief Lumpkin arrived at the Texas School Book Depository. At that time, Lumpkin entered the building and instructed that it be completely sealed off, that no one be allowed to leave or enter. Lieutenant Eric Kaminsky was placed on the inner door of the building, and Lieutenant Jack Reville, together with Detective H.H. Davis, Jr., and Detective Tommy Tompkins and several other detectives, were instructed to clear the building of employees by office and floor by floor. As each office and floor was cleared, the employees were stopped by Kaminsky and Mr. Truly, manager of the firm, at the front door, where their names, addresses, and telephone numbers were written down, and they were identified by Mr. Truly as to their employment. So, if you want to think that this is what Oswald is talking about, according to the Harry Holmes account, This might fit better because Truly, in this situation, might identify him as an employee, and then Kaminsky might take him aside for a few moments to get his address and phone number. And as it said there in the Bachelor report, Jack Reville participated in this operation, and as he told the Warren Commission here, we conducted a systematic search of the building, evacuated the people working in the building, and took names, addresses, and phone numbers of all these people before they were permitted to leave. And we have such a list in evidence, and the very first name on that list is a familiar one, Harvey Lee Oswald, 605 Elsbeth Street. And that list was typed up on November 22nd, and it's signed by Detective Westfall. And Reville tells the Warren Commission that Westfall was one of the detectives that accompanied him from the Texas School Book Depository back to the police headquarters. So it looks like Westfall probably carried the handwritten list, which we don't have in evidence apparently, and brought it back to headquarters and typed up the list we do have. And Harvey Lee Oswald is on that list with the address of 605 Elsbeth. So this implies that Oswald was one of the people who was identified as an employee by Truly and who was brought aside and was questioned as to his address and phone number, and he didn't have a telephone there apparently. And this fits better with the scenario as it comes through Holmes than it does with the second floor encounter scenario. That is, it sounds like the way Holmes tells the story of Oswald telling the story, that the story is closer to this first floor encounter idea than it is to the second floor encounter idea. And when the Warren Commission is talking to Reville, they're talking about the address on this document here, which is a Jack Reville document, where he reports the address for Lee Harvey Oswald as 605 Elsbeth Street. 605 Elsbeth Street, according to the official story, is something that Oswald never lived at. He lived at 604, sometimes known as 602, but he did not live at 605, according to the official story. So the Warren Commission ostensibly was interested in why Jack Reville had this 605 address here. And Reville comes up with a kind of a vague story about having got it from one of the arresting officers. And there's a story that it came off of the library card that Oswald had, even though the library card doesn't have 605 on it. It's kind of an unsatisfying explanation for this address. So maybe that 605 Elsbeth address actually came from this list because Harvey Lee Oswald gave that address to Kaminsky just before he left the Texas School Book Depository. Now there is another copy of this list. It's the same typing, but somebody has written things on this copy. And one of the things written is a phone number, WH83202, Gertrude Roper. And Gertrude Roper is the name of somebody who lived at 605 Elsbeth Street, at least in 1961 and presumably also in 1963. I've made a video on the 605 Elsbeth Street address, and that's when I researched this. So it looks like, though I can't say for certain who wrote on this, but presumably it's the Dallas police writing things on their list as they check out things. Now they may have just looked in the phone book for the address and written down this name, but it looks like they were investigating Harvey Lee Oswald's address and came up with a name and a phone number. We don't know if they ever called that number. It would be good to know if Mrs. Roper was contacted and asked about Harvey Lee Oswald, but we don't have such information. At least I've never seen it. So I think this suggests the possibility that we have a Harvey and Lee thing going on here. That is, that both of them work at the Texas School Book Depository. And one of them was involved with a second-floor encounter with Marion Baker, and the other one walked out the front door after being identified as an employee by Roy Truly and giving his address to Kaminsky, the police officer. Now, of course, Truly would know if there was a Harvey Lee Oswald and a Lee Harvey Oswald, and presumably he would say so. But we don't know that Truly identified the person by name. We only know what it says in the documents, that he identified people as employees, and presumably then the employee gave the name to the cop. So it could be that Harvey Lee Oswald worked at the Texas School Book Depository under a different name, but happened to give the Harvey Lee Oswald name to the cop as kind of a joke. There's lots of indications in this story where Harvey or Lee, if there are both of them, one or the other or both, had a sense of humor and would do things like that. And the only employee I know of that could be Harvey is Freddie Kaiser. There happened to be a pair of twins who worked at the Texas School Book Depository, according to the official story. Not Harvey and Lee, but Frank and Fred, the Kaiser boys. Now, Frankie Kaiser is more well known in the story. In fact, I don't think Fred Kaiser is mentioned at all by the Texas School Book Depository people. I don't think his name is mentioned at all. But Frank Kaiser was the guy who found Oswald's clipboard later, right out in the open where anyone could have seen it. He found it, I forget how long later, weeks later, I think. And on the day of the assassination, he happened to be absent with a tooth abscess. He was in the dentist chair. Fred Kaiser, according to the official story as we have it, quit working for the Texas School Book Depository on the day before the assassination. And he later applied for a job at the All Right parking garage. In fact, as I understand it, the only reason we know about Fred Kaiser Jr. is because the Dallas police were investigating the incident where Oswald had applied at this parking garage before the assassination. And they've discovered, well, let me read this. Mr. Hallmark allowed the undersigned officers to look through the applications for the month of November 1963, and no application was found in regards to Oswald. Mr. Hallmark did have one employment application, which was filled out between the 1st and 15th of December 1963. This application was for one Fred Kaiser Jr., who listed his last place of employment as the Texas School Book Depository. And as far as I know, this is all we know. This is the only reason we even know about Fred Kaiser, is because there's an application for him the police allegedly found at the All Right parking garage. So perhaps Frankie Kaiser is somehow a conspiracy tool, and Fred Kaiser did not really work at the Texas School Book Depository, but Harvey used Fred Kaiser's name in order to work there, and nobody would know the difference except Frank. And if Frank's a tool, then nobody else is going to know the difference. And perhaps Lee or Harvey Oswald, under the name Fred Kaiser, walked out the front door, was identified as an employee by Roy Truly because he was an employee, and gave his name to the cop as Harvey Lee Oswald and left the building. And perhaps some of the interview reports we have are with Lee Harvey Oswald, and this one sat in by Harry Holmes perhaps was with Harvey Lee Oswald. It's an idea.